Hey, my name is Rowan Smith and I want to welcome you to the Training for Trekking podcast. Now, this is the world's very first podcast which is entirely dedicated to helping you train, prepare and conquer your upcoming hike, trek or mountain adventure. So once a week, I'm going to be giving you quality and practical information on the subjects of physical preparation for trekking, dealing with altitude and nutrition on the trail, so you can know everything you need to be doing to have the best chance of a safe, enjoyable and successful adventure. So now you know what you're in for, let's get into today's episode. Right, hello guys. Today we talk about optimal versus practical for your training. Now, the reason why I want to talk about this today is because this subject has recently come up in the Training for Hiking and Trekking Facebook group. About a week ago, I put up a post around a few nutrition principles which I recommend hikers follow. And they were pretty straightforward, they were pretty simple, but they tended to rub one guy up the wrong way. And he had the issue that he said they were too simple and that the hikers would be getting much better results if they followed a very, very advanced nutrition practice. And my argument there was like, look, this thing potentially may be good for some people in some particular situations, but it's too complicated, it's too restrictive, it's got too much going on for it to be realistic and practical for the majority of hikers out there. And that's a principle which I do hold pretty strongly in my coaching. And one of my core philosophies as a coach is really to present and share training and preparation strategies which are actually practical for a hiker to follow. So not just something that in an ideal world we'd all be able to follow and think, hey, this is the best thing in the world. But essentially we all live in the real world. We all have things going on, whether we have a family, whether we have a job, whether we have, different health concerns or injury concerns, or whether we're just busy or whatever it may be. We all have stuff going on, and my whole intention with the information that I share and also use myself as my own training is how can a hiker, trekker or backpacker see the best results for the outcomes they're looking for with the least amount of effort and stress. Because in my opinion, if a training approach, a nutrition approach, a preparation approach, or whatever it is causing you extra stress in your life, is really, really making sure you hold back in certain areas of your life and you have to constantly be thinking about it and monitoring it and tailoring it, I think it's just too much. I don't think it's necessary, in all honesty. So my whole role as a coach is to distill all these things and come up with the strategies which are the easiest to apply while still giving you very, very good results. And I firmly believe that this really is the key to success for 99% of people out there, finding these simple strategies which work and applying them consistently and diligently. And in all honesty, that is going to get you a long, long, long way. And this is kind of why I rarely talk about what is optimal, in quotation marks, in your training. I know this is a really hot topic in, a lot of different areas and a lot of different areas in fitness in which people talk about human optimization and optimizing your training and doing the 1,000,001 things that can really, really get the most out of every single second you're spending in the gym and your training. But I don't really talk about this because I know optimal is almost never practical. And if something's just not practical and it's not realistic and it's harder than it should be to put into action, then in all honesty, it probably isn't a great recommendation for the majority of people. Now, to give you a little bit of insight here, I'm going to give you a few examples to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. Now, one classic example which sprung first to mind when I was coming up with this episode is when it comes to recovery. Now, with recovery, sleep and deep sleep is incredibly, incredibly, incredibly important. And we talked about this on the podcast before. And according to a reasonable amount of research, when looking at someone who's doing a lot of training, about 10 hours a night of sleep is considered optimal for recovery. Meaning 10 hours was the sweet spot. You're getting much better benefits than an 8 hours sleep. And that's what's recommended for people who are doing lots and lots of training if they're looking to be optimal. But in all honesty, you'll never hear me really pushing this. I may mention it a few times, but I'm never going to try and force someone to have 10 hours sleep a night. And I'm never going to try and say that someone should be aiming for that because it's not practical. We all have jobs. We've got to wake up early. We've got to do things. We've got young families, whatever it may be. Getting 8 hours a night is hard enough for some people, and trying to strive for 10 hours a night, it's just not going to happen for most people. And that's something I never really talk about. Or another example is when it comes to improving performance. So we previously talked about how good a coffee can be before you're training or before you're hiking, or a little bit of caffeine in any way, shape or form to be a great aid for your performance. And I've talked about how it can improve pretty much everything under the sun, whether it's your endurance performance, your strength performance, your mood, or whatever it may be. And when you get down to the research, what is considered optimal is having the equivalent of about 5 coffees or so before you train. Now that is what is considered optimal. But you're never going to hear me recommending that because it's crazy. And no one's going to be having that much caffeine before you train on a regular basis. It's just not smart and it's not practical, even if it may be optimal according to the research. Or another area is, what's considered optimal when it comes to developing your aerobic capacity and your aerobic fitness is doing 4 or more long, steady state aerobic sessions. So that's anything from 40 minutes, 30 minutes or longer of jogging, cycling, hiking, whatever it may be. 4 or more is considered optimal in a week. And in an ideal world, yeah, absolutely. Go right ahead, smash that out, fit those sessions in. But for a lot of us, that's not going to be practical. It's not going to happen in a week if we're going to try and fit in a little bit of strength training as well, if we're going to try and fit in a bit of recovery, if we're going to try and just have a bit of time to our lives. It's just not practical. And while some people might be able to do that, for the majority of people who are looking to train for hiking, it's not going to happen. And it's not something I generally talk about. Or another area, when it comes to injury prevention and also improving performance. Strength training, as I've said a million times on this podcast, it is incredibly important. And according to a lot of the research, doing most of your work at 85% of your 1 repetition maximum or higher, which equals out to be the equivalent of 6 repetitions or less, but not doing 6 repetitions or less where it's easy, but where it's a genuine struggle. Now that is considered optimal for strength development, for injury prevention, for improving performance in endurance activities. But I don't advocate for this above all else because I know this isn't practical for most people. Maybe hikers don't want to train in the gym. Maybe they're not confident lifting heavy weights like that. Maybe they're not competent enough. Maybe they prefer to train at home. They don't have access to equipment or whatever it may be. This recommendation in an ideal world, if we were all training in a gym with a personal trainer, yeah, absolutely, go right ahead. But for most hikers out there, it's not realistic, it's not practical, and it's not something I recommend. Now, a few more just to hammer home my point. Another thing which is optimal is to never look at blue light after the sun goes down. Meaning you're never looking at your phone, you're never looking at TV, you're never looking at a laptop screen after the sun naturally goes down. That is considered optimal, it ain't practical. Another thing that's considered optimal is to do your strength training in the evening instead of the morning. Now, if you're looking at the science and you really want to dive into it, apparently you can lift heavier weights in the evening than the morning. But if you can't train in the morning, if you can't train in the evening, if you're coming home from work and you're fatigued or if you've got stuff going on, that's not practical. And I'm never going to be recommending that just because some science recommends it. And the final one I want to talk about is it's probably optimal to track all your power outputs and all your speeds for every single cardio session you do. So meaning every time you sit on a bike, every time you're going for a run, you know exactly how much power you're producing through that thing. But again, that's just not practical for so many people. And, I hope you've seen the recurring theme here is what is optimal is very, very, very practical. And it's very, very rarely realistic for the everyday hiker. But in all honesty, it doesn't matter. Because a lot of these recommendations, a lot of these things talking about what is optimal, what is best, they're all based around competitive athletes who are really, really time crunched in the sense they're trying to shave every single millimeter off their race times, or potentially they're in competitive sport and they're just really, really trying to get every single little percentage of performance squeezed out of there. And they may be chasing these optimal things, but that's not us. And that's not us looking at listening to this podcast. We're hikers, we're trekkers, we're backpackers. And ultimately what we're looking to do is get fit, strong, and pain-free for the trail, which essentially will keep us safe, will help us have an enjoyable and also a successful adventure wherever that may be. So that doesn't mean we have to be shaving seconds off our time. That doesn't mean we have to be working at 100% pure optimization. What it means is we don't have to stress about these things. You still do have to do training. You still do have to be smart and follow structured recommendations, but you should be choosing ways of going about this which are realistic to fit into your life, fit into your particular situation, which isn't causing you extra stress, isn't causing you extra concern. Because in all honesty, if you follow smart and proven training methods, which I talk about on this podcast again and again and again, and you can find the ones which fit in and around your own life. In all honesty, if you do this well, if you apply consistently over the long term, and you continually progress whatever you may be doing, that's going to get 99% of hikers, not only to the outcomes that they want, not only to get pain-free, not only to succeed in the treks they're trying to do, but it's going to get you so much further than you could ever imagine. Just let that sink in. Whatever you're aiming for at the moment, if you do the right things, even if it is not considered absolutely optimal, it is going to get you so much further than you can possibly imagine right now. I've seen this time and time again with my hikers that I work with. They have an initial goal. They all of a sudden realize their body is capable of so much more. That goal keeps on getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And before they know it, they're aiming for the stars, and they really never thought that was possible. All because they follow simple and practical training recommendations, but they apply it diligently and consistently. So I hope you've got a bit of insight into what I'm trying to talk about today. If I haven't hammered that home enough for you, well, I don't really know what I can say. Yes, optimal is good in an ideal world. And yes, if any of these things work for you and you can fit them in with no stress, then absolutely go for it. But for the majority of the hikers, you don't have to stress about optimal. You want to think about practical, aligned with what is actually going to get you results. And that is exactly what I share on my podcast, in my training group, on my content, through my emails, and anywhere else I put out information. So if you apply these things, it's going to take you so far. So I hope you got a bit of insight out of this today, guys. I hope you understand where I'm coming from, and I hope that's sort of sunk in and given you a little bit to think about. Now, if you did want to discuss this a little bit further, if you wanted to sort of find some ideas where you may be able to make your training or make your approach to preparation a little bit more practical, but you're not 100% sure whether that will lose its effectiveness and you want a second opinion, feel free, come and join the Training for Hiking and Trekking Facebook group. Come in there, post up your question. I'm always happy to dive into these things in a little bit more detail, and we can sort of collaborate together to make sure you're getting the best results for the least amount of stress in your life. So if you do want to find that group, you can find the Training for Hiking and Trekking Facebook group. I'll leave a link in the show notes below. But thank you so much for listening today, guys. I really do hope you've gotten a little bit out of it, and we'll talk to you very soon.